Good morning, everybody, whatever part of the world you're currently listening to our cast. I know I tend to connect the two. I know on this video blog I said podcast only, but it's actually, since I'm able to upload video onto our podcast platform. So it's basically my video blog and podcast. All right, so don't get confused when I say video blog and podcast, because that's what I meant. I tend to interchange the two. Anyway, it's a beautiful day. It's a Wednesday afternoon, and I thought I'd take a quick break from what I was working on and kind of stretch my legs, do a little bit of cardio exercise, and talk a little bit about some of the things that are floating around in the news, environment lately. So recently I came across this material where President Trump was in the Oval Office with the president of El Salvador, talking about this one guy that was deported back to El Salvador. So actually, when I was reading the case, the guy entered the U.S. illegally, okay, and then he managed to basically work around the system and got some hand slapping, and basically they let him off the hook. Okay, and then a couple of years later, because he came in illegally, he showed up in the system that he's here undocumented. Okay, and so what tends to happen is that people that enter the U.S. illegally end up being picked up by the system. I don't know how things are done, but that's just how it is. And so regardless if you were, if you were given the temporary stay or permit or whatever to be in the country, they're still listed as one of those people that entered illegally. So that's the case, right? And so anyway, one of the press correspondents have asked the president of El Salvador if he would consider returning the guy from there back to the U.S. The guy that was picked up. It's not El Salvador. He's in an El Salvador jail, and he said, there is no reason for him to basically, resend the guy back, because there was no legal right for the guy that entered the U.S. illegally to be here. So he understood that his El Salvadorian citizen, broke the law. So you imagine that if the president, head of state of a country where the illegal, person came from, refused to let that person out of the jail that he's being kept in, because apparently the guy was already creating all sorts of problems and issues back in El Salvador, even coming to the U.S. So that just shows you the caliber of these people that are coming to the U.S. illegally. So anyway, the president of El Salvador said that he was not interested in sending the guy back to the U.S., regardless if the U.S. were to request for him to be returned, even though I don't think the U.S. is asking for him to be returned. There were people in the media and Democratic circle that is very adamant to use this case, a one-off case, that to make a point. And the problem is, the guy has committed all sorts of criminal act back in his home country of El Salvador, and yet these Democrat politicians that are calling for him to be returned to the U.S. continuously ignore the fact that he was already a criminal back in his home country, and then he violated our sovereign right, our law in our country, in the U.S., knowingly. And so, the guy is a career lawbreaker. Okay, if he breaks his own law from his own country and then breaks the law of a foreign country, then there is no reason for him to be returned to the U.S., in my opinion. Okay. So anyway, that's been, kind of being discussed regularly now because of this one case. Okay. As far as justifying the reason why the Democrats don't want this kind of repatriation to keep on happening, because in all reality, they don't care if those people that they support were criminals. They don't care if those people that they support broke U.S. laws. They don't care if those they support were even interested in abiding, by our laws. They just want to make a political statement, even though it's disjointed and makes no sense whatsoever. But they want to make a political statement just so that they can, inform the public that what the Trump administration is doing is illegal and does not, constitute any form of standing in protecting our country, which is basically wrong, completely wrong. Okay, these politicians, especially from the Democratic Party, wants to politicize everything, even though what they're saying is extremely disjointed and it's even irrelevant to the subject. They just want to, basically whine and accuse people of things that is supposed to be done in our country, consistent to our laws. All right, folks. So that's the local news that I'm kind of watching and paying attention to. As far as the international news with Ukraine and Eastern Central Europe, seems like Ukraine's running out of allies. People are not trusting them anymore, and it's gotten to the point that Zelensky is trying to bribe people now. All right, folks, and it's amazing that things are so clear, clear as daylight, where corruption and lies from the Zelensky regime is rampant, but yet here we are again. All right, trying to justify his actions. And I mean, the guy run on a campaign, okay, before he became president. He had said that he wants to recapture back those states, the territories that sided with the Russians, you know, and he would do everything and anything in his power to bring them back into the fold, even though they don't want to be a member of Ukraine. They had a referendum, and basically they said and voted that, you know, they don't want to be a part of the Russian Federation. And that's why they become a part of the Russian territory. Okay? But Zelensky didn't want to accept that. In his mind, you know, those territories belongs to Ukraine. Look, I understand the sentiment of various countries wanting to keep territory. Okay? But if you are a student of history, every country have been diversified, fragmented, redistricted, and occupied. There was once a part in U.S. history where California, New Mexico, Arizona, you know, all these states that were close to the territory of Mexico were redistricted and occupied, and they sided with the Union. Okay? But because at that time, during the Spanish-American War, the Spaniards lost, and they ended up transferring power and authority to the Union, the US. Nothing different today with Ukraine and Russia. You know, those territories that sided with the Russians, nothing different today. Okay, those people that lives in those territories wanted to be a part of the Russian Federation. Okay? And that's why they voted to be a part of it. You know, regardless of what people say as far as, you know, how the election took place, there's some people that claims that it was an illegal, you know, a referendum and all sorts of stuff. So, if it was an illegal referendum, then why didn't they just run another referendum instead of attacking those territories, which was happening back in 2021? The war didn't start in February 2022. It started back in 2021 when people from Ukraine, and this is what everybody in the region are thinking, was that they were sent to those territories, the referendum territories, by Zelensky's people. Okay, that's what the talks is in Eastern Europe. People that knows the region are saying that somebody authorized the attack on those territories. All right, folks. Yes, but you don't hear that in the news, do you? You don't hear CNN covering the full story, or any of these liberal media covering the story. So, yeah, that's just the reality of things, folks. And now, several years later, there's still an ongoing war. A war that could have been prevented, lives could have been saved, had the news organizations of this world, the powerful news organizations of the Western countries, the West, okay, actually reported the news truthfully, okay? All right, folks. So anyway, there's an upcoming election in Romania this May. As you all know, if you've been following my podcast and video blog, that Romania actually had to annul the results of the first round of their presidential election and then cancel the second round altogether and move the election a few months down the road, which is 5 months down the road in May. All right, folks. The guy who won the election and whose victory was annulled the first round is no longer allowed to run for office from some reason. I don't know why. They banned him from running for, office and into this new election season in May. So if they annul the results in December, he's basically starting from nothing, from zero. But they decided that he's no longer allowed or qualified to be a candidate. So the next person that was his supporter is now running in his behalf, and based off of the reports that he's actually going toe-to-toe against a much more well-known politician, okay, who happens to be supported by the powerful elites of Brussels. So just a few hours ago, I saw that there were, congressional representatives that decided to visit Romania and met with the president's office and the ruling elites of the country, as well as this newcomer who is now going toe-to-toe, 50-50 as far as, their polling status, and met with him. So they took the time to meet with this newbie guy, the no-name newbie guy. So that's going to make things a lot more interesting, folks, because it will basically dictate the overall relationship between the Trump administration and Romania moving forward. As most of you know, the largest base in Europe, NATO base in Europe, used to be in Germany, but today it's in Romania. It's gotten farther out into the eastern flank of Europe. So the Trump administration obviously are not in line with this, continuation of the war. They're definitely against it for many good reasons, to be honest. But there are people in Brussels that are still trying to continue and preserve the narrative, okay, to support Zelensky's regime. So that is the current situation today. All right, folks. The world has gotten so brainwashed that people in Western Europe, okay, are still thinking as if we live in the 1940s, during World War II and other, extremely volatile and dangerous times and era in the world. If y'all consider what took place during World War II, it was mainly because they are not able to, contemplate the need for peace. They were basically creating a narrative to promote their own power and strength back in 2020, in the World War II. Today, there is no need for any of that. All right, folks. Peace be the norm in today's world. Okay, diplomacy should be preserved and exercised. All right. Unfortunately, there are still people stuck on stupid in Europe. They feel that the only way for them to, beat their chests and have the world know that they're powerful is to showcase their military strength, okay, and resist, the engagement of diplomacy as much as they can. Okay, so this case and situation with Ukraine is extremely problematic. Not only did it disrupt the region and the markets in Central and Eastern Europe and worldwide in certain extent, I wouldn't say Ukraine was the only reason, but ultimately, if you consider what's been taking place, Ukraine could have prevented the war. They could have easily, came together with the Russians and developed some sort of peace, mechanism to bring both countries back into normalcy. But due to the dwindling, interest from the West, they're basically decided that, okay, the only way for them to return to normalcy is if somebody were to lose. And obviously, the Russians will never lose. They've already won the war before they even shot the first bullet. Look at the size of the Russian military. They're extremely professional, have been training for ages. They've been ready for combat for decades. They're going against a civilian population that receive weapons that was issued to them just weeks before the onset of the war. Never been to battle, never had formal training, and most of them never shot a gun before. There was this guy by the name of Gonzalo Lira who was in Ukraine. He happens to be married to a Ukrainian lady, and he was in Ukraine talking about the whole situation on his YouTube channel. He was a YouTuber, podcaster, and influencer, and basically he just shared material that was already readily available, not just in Ukraine but all over the world. He was just talking about materials that he managed to come across. They're already available worldwide, but yet because he was in Ukraine, they took their frustration out on him. So they imprisoned this guy for talking about essentially just everything that was already available. It's readily available online worldwide, but they picked on him and basically kept him in jail. So he ended up dying in captivity in Ukraine for expressing his views, exercising his freedom of speech. That could have easily de-escalated the war, de-escalated this conflict, okay? But yet he was, picked on and was turned into an example by the Zelensky government. So anyway, that's the reality of this war. It shouldn't have happened. Could have been prevented. Both parties should have figured out a way to, return the region back to normalcy. So anyway, going back to the elections in Central and Eastern Europe, there are now oppositions against the ruling elites that tends to be in line with the European Union that are now pushing back. These are the no-name independent candidates. They're, nobodies essentially in their societies, but they're pushing back because they want to end the war and they don't want to side with Ukraine, knowingly that Ukraine wants to keep on fighting. They want to, continue this massacre that's going on in their country against a professional Russian military. They know this. They know they're going against people and military, personnel that have been training for ages. And they have more weapons and they have more experience in combat. Okay, folks. So, yeah, now the region, Central and Eastern Europe, is starting to, exert. There's a plane up there, a radar plane. Anyway, the people in Central and Eastern Europe, the non-elite politicians, the nobodies, are now pushing back, and they're saying, no, we are not going to be supporting a war that could have been prevented. And they don't want anything to do with Ukraine. And you can't really blame them. So, but yeah, there's going to be this election in Romania in May, and it's going to be a big election just because of the overall status of the country in the region. As I mentioned, Romania is the base of the biggest NATO installation in Europe. Okay, folks. That's just the reality of things today. So it's going to be more, I guess, people would pay attention more to what's going on in the region vis-a-vis Romania. Okay, because the Trump administration definitely want to end the war. They don't want to, keep on supporting, the Zelensky government, obviously, and which I agree. And they don't want to have to, entertain the notion that they're divorcing themselves from NATO and the European Union, from our Western allies. That's not the objective of the Trump administration. They want to strengthen the region by promoting peace and stability. You can't operate in a market environment when there's an ongoing war. Think about it. And you can't operate in a market environment when there's a lot of political instability. On top of that, you can't operate in a region, in a country that is next door to Russia and try to, influence security that is adversely targeting the Russian, population, the country. You can't have peace when you're telling your neighbor that, okay, watch out, we're gonna come back and get you if you give us enough time to build up our capacity. So the Russians definitely don't want that, and they're not gonna allow that to happen. So think about what I'm telling you all, folks. All right, I know there's a lot of kind of disjointed material and information out there, and most of the nobodies are being silenced. I've been silenced many times, obviously, but in all reality, folks, you don't need to be a brainiac. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to put two and two together and to connect the dots. All of this could be easily figured out by even a school grade child. It's just so stupid, in my opinion, that the war is still going on. That they still have this conflict, right? Anyway, wow. Okay, so I'm actually walking slow today, it seems like. I've been talking for half an hour, but I'm only halfway away from where I started. So that's just the reality of things, folks. This conflict between Russia and war could have been prevented easily had they, taken the time and let cool minds prevail. All right, folks. Yeah, in my opinion, so many lives could have been saved. Right? That's my take on this whole issue. And let me know what you think. I mean, everything that I'm sharing with you is already available online. It's not like this are new information. I just thought I'd help, basically connect the dots and help you make sense of it all if you haven't been following this war, or even the issues that have been happening in the region religiously. Speaking of which, when I said religiously, it's Easter week for the Orthodox population of Central and Eastern Europe, and for the Christian community in the U.S. Okay. So I want to, wish y'all happy Easter, regardless what your theology is. And, let's observe what, the Christians of the past used to stand for. So, in history, those who believe in the Christian doctrine appreciate the fact that, peace and goodwill should prevail regardless of what the situation is. Peace and goodwill. Now, when evil is around and is prevalent, the good men and the good women of this world are supposed to rise against it. We are supposed to expose evil, corruption, nefarious activities and exercises of power that is disjointed and misaligned, from the doctrine of peace and good. Look at what's going on around the world today. You would think that because of technology, because of the social media platform, things would be better, because we would essentially be able to transfer knowledge, and basically endorse, information and doctrines and philosophies that is in line with peace and goodwill among men, regardless of their station in life, regardless of their race, regardless of their background, religion, nationality, political affiliation, but yet we have come to the point in humanity, where we're living in a more evil world today, much more evil compared to previous generations, mostly because it was amplified by technology, either on social media or people that are bad actors hiding behind the internet. The internet was never a part of human history before. Folks, never have we had this kind of interaction with the world, or with the world, simultaneously engaging people that it would never had access to before. And now the whole world is burning up, because people that are in power, that have no business being in power, are in the helm. They're in charge of societies and countries. Until good people rise up and call injustice as injustice, okay, and call evil activities as evil, and the exercise of abuse of power, abuse, things are going to get worse for the next generation. Okay, when I started drafting my faceconomics concept, my book, while I was still back in college, I was looking through the binoculars or goggles of world peace, economic development, prosperity for all, equality, and the preservation of human rights, freedom of speech, okay, and civility. All that went down the drain because of those people in power, mainly the social media giants. They're silencing influencers that wants to contribute and make this world a better place. Okay, the change makers, they're silencing them. Okay, and yet amplifying the voices of the corrupt, the evil, the nefarious, bad actors out there, so that more eyeballs will generate additional revenue for these social media giants. As I talked about in my last podcast, these social media giants are based in blue states, Democrat states. Point, for you to consider is that Meta, Facebook, YouTube are based in California, where Kamala Harris originated, or somewhat originated, from off of her political ideologies. So if Meta and YouTube and these social media giants are silencing people that are not in agreement with the doctrine of the Democratic Party, then it becomes a dictatorship. It becomes an oppression, tyranny in the social media environment. And what makes it really, really bad is that it's not a physical environment, it's an online environment where thousands and thousands and millions of people interact. Okay? And so it's much easier for bad actors to share materials that would trigger, a catastrophic event in this world, okay, and silence the voices, silence the voices of those that want to preserve democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of speech, the rule of law, okay, human rights and civil rights. Do away with racism in the world. Alright, folks, so that's just how things are. And good people of this world, don't do anything, don't fight back, don't speak up, then it will be extremely dangerous for the next generation to live in a democratic society, loving society, in a society that observe, the rule of law, the protection of civil rights and human rights and freedom of speech. All right, folks. So, yeah, that's a sad reality that we have up against us now. There's a lot of bad actors out there, and it's unfortunate that very few people wants to fight back and push back. Okay, think about those people that fought back, in the past, who sacrificed their own, comfort and even freedom to make sure that the next generation are protected. All right, folks, so I'm going to leave you with that question for now. I'm going to let you reflect and consider what we've talked about today. Okay, folks, we may only have a few subscribers, we might have only a few supporters, we may only have a few listeners to our podcast and video blog. I'm hoping one way or the other that we can win hearts and minds before it's too late. With this said, folks, thank you for joining me. Look forward to the next engagement. Have a wonderful rest of the week and enjoy your time among your loved ones and friends. Take care. Bye-bye.